Nilanjan, we are live. You can start now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for this delay. Actually, these technical issues do crop up, and we were facing this delay of YouTube and everything else. But thank you, IFES team, for being such a wonderful team and taking care of everything. So instead, without going much into the details, I would request my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Saranya Singh, to kindly introduce Professor Ayila Orkusa and proceed with the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Welcome back, everyone, for the second session of the day. It's an honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Ayila Orkusa to our honorable guests and dignitaries and colleagues. Dr. Orkusa is an indigene of Benue State, Nigeria. He earned his PhD and MA in English Literature at the University of Nigeria, Suka, in 2019 and 2015, respectively. He had earlier obtained a BA degree in English Literature from Ahmadu Bello University, Zaire, in 2010. His research interest lies in African literature, comparative literature, world literature, and European modernist literature. He has taught English as foreign language at the University of Ngaoundere, Cameroon, from 2017 to 2019. He presently teaches literary studies in the Department of English and Modern Letters at the same university. His PhD dissertation, Radical Ambivalence in Joseph Conrad's Lord Jim and Franz Kafka's The Trial, is a study of meaning with a focus on radical ambivalence as a fundamental process in Lord Jim and The Trial. The comparative analysis of the text was undertaken to investigate the presence of radical ambivalence in both Lord Jim and The Trial, using modern conceptions of ambivalence to examine how the conflicting or contradictory structures in the text shape and affect the meaning of the texts. Dr. Orkusa has great strength in textual analysis, literary criticism, and theory. He is currently working on a project to read some selected works of Chinua Achebe as world literature. I welcome Dr. Orkusa once again, and we all look forward to an engaging session, sir. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you to all the participants and the wonderful technical team for the good work. I have been asked to talk of centers and margins, origins, conflicts, and issues. That's been the theme for our seminar. And having been given the privilege to choose any issue or topic of my choice concerning center margin in African literature, I chose to speak on patterns of intersocietal inequalities in some selected African literature. I give a brief summary of what I have done. Of center margins, origins, conflicts, and issues has received concern such that we are gathered here today from different parts of the world virtually for the purpose of sharing our thoughts on it. And by the liberty to speak on centers and margins in African literature, I chose to speak on patterns of intersocietal inequalities in some selected African literature. This paper explains the center margins in literature simply as intersocietal inequalities. It further answers the question on the presence of centers and margins in African literature that there is such a divide in the literature of the region. Attempt is made to identify the sources of centers and margins relationship, as well as to discuss practical cases and patterns of centers margin in some of the selected works. The conclusion shows that the sources of margins and centers, otherwise known as core periphery in creative African literature, include imperialism and African culture. These two factors have received support of the laws and judicial system that have been set up to support inequalities among societies and groups. So by way of introduction, I begin by saying that given the context of centers and margins here, are used synonymous to core periphery. The term core periphery will be used in my discussion or in my talk this morning to mean centers and margins, which is our concern here. The term center margins or core periphery, as I've said, is derived from the field of world system analysis, particularly from sociological field, to discuss dominance and dependence relationship. So core periphery will be used interchangeably with centers and margins in this talk. Christopher Charles Dunn and Thomas D. Hall assert that core periphery is nothing but intersocietal inequalities. So when I'm talking about inequalities in African literature, I am simply looking at core periphery. And when I'm talking about core periphery, I am concerned with our centers and margins. And I would like to make a little clarification here on the ground that core centers or margin peripheries are not in terms of physical geography, but they are simply about class system that is manifest in intersocietal relationship. So the core peripheral hierarchy suggests one thing, but I would like to first of all say that core periphery is divided into two. There is what is called, according to Charles Dunn and Thomas Hall, there is what is called core periphery differentiation and core periphery hierarchy. Core periphery differentiation, in their definition of the concept, simply means a relationship that exists between societies, irrespective of dominance, irrespective of dependence. But when you come to core peripheral hierarchies, this suggests dominance of the core and the exploitative relationship between the core and the periphery. Sanderson, page 175. And the core here is central. These are the basic features about the core. The core is the central. The core is order when it is in terms of civilization, when in terms of societies and communities and order. The core is the central, the order, it is advanced, it is worthy, it is powerful, more than periphery. Periphery, on the other hand, is weakly connected to the core, is dependent upon the core. And according to David Wilkins, periphery consists the nomads, peasant subsistence, not yet attached to city and other civilizations that are being pushed by the center, by the core. So in every ramification, the periphery or the margins depend on the core, which is also known as the center. Now, the question is, how does world system analysis concern African literature? And the answer to this question is based on a theoretical standpoint, which from the new historicist point of view, a textual representation or a literary text is the product of its negotiations with history and cultural exchanges, which become an interesting site for new historians, Tiwari and Chandra, page 83. For the Marxists, on the other hand, there is a general vested interest in understanding the relationship between the literary text and the social world, recognizing that literature is a process and that the social world involves context of production and those of reception. Marxists regard literature as both production and reflection of and on culture and society. Philip Rice and Bo Patricia, page 103. Therefore, African writers create meaning from the particulars, which in most cases demand borrowing and an engagement of social facts, which may later be diversified into abstract themes. Ayila Orkusa, page 39. This process of diversifying into abstract themes include defamiliarization or making strange, what Victor Shklovsky calls ostraneni. Mikis Davis, page 87, Hammond Adam, Etar, page 50, Susan Brasted, page 151. It is against this backdrop that this seminar text focuses on patterns of intersocietal inequalities in some selected African literature to study centers, margins relationship, otherwise known as core periphery. The novel selected have broad patterns of intersocietal inequalities, which include core periphery differentiation and core periphery hierarchy. I have explained the two concepts. They are actually sociological concepts that are used in world system, so I needed to explain them. So I have explained them earlier: core periphery differentiation and core periphery hierarchy. Core periphery differentiation, as I have said earlier, I'll still mention it. Let me mention it for the sake of flow, so that I'll flow into the argument. Core periphery differentiation and core periphery hierarchy, Charles Dunn and Ho define as a system in which societies at different level of complexity and population density are in interaction with each other within the same world system. This is what core periphery differentiation means. In this case, they are simply interacting with one another. One society interacting with the other within the same world system. While core periphery hierarchy mean the existence of political, economic, or ideological domination between different societies within the same world system. So as I mentioned earlier, in this hierarchy, core periphery hierarchy, which is equivalent to center margin hierarchy, is strictly based on, the relationship is based on domination and dependence. Charles Dunn and Ho therefore define world system as the intersocietal network in which the interaction, that's trade, warfare, intermarriage, etc., is an important condition of the reproduction or the internal structures or the composite unit, and importantly affect changes which occur in these local structures. The select manifest differently as they diversely represent dominance and dependence, either directly or indirectly, between developed and developing societies. For the sake of convenience, I prefer to use the words societies. So the developed here, I am representing it with strong societies, and the developing or underdeveloped, I'm presenting it with weak societies to look at inequalities that exist, cultural inequalities in African literature. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, published first in 1958, begins with a core peripheral differentiation pattern. There is a consortium of 9 communities with intersocietal network that include marriage and other social interactions that manifest in the settlement with a neighboring tribe. If you are familiar with Things Fall Apart, there is a boy called Ikemefuna. Ikemefuna is a boy that was given to Umofia people as the result of a settlement between Umofia and the community. So they gave Ikemefuna and a virgin to Umofia people. The this simple act of exchanging human being for peace resolution is huge in the sense that it could be read into different meanings. But my singular concern here is to show that there is a relationship that exists between Umuofia people in the text and other communities that is not necessarily dependence and dominance. It doesn't work on the basis of dependence and dominance. The people are simply interacting, maybe as neighbors, maybe as partners in whichever form. And again, there is a marriage, intermarriage system that goes on between the Umuofia people and the other communities, the 9 villages that are involved. This is a sign that there is a core peripheral differentiation, because there is a center of course there must be a center, but Achebe doesn't really bother to show which one is stronger, which one is weaker. He simply shows us that there is an intersocietal exchange between these communities or among these communities. Now, having looked at that, we also look at the marriage system. Okonkwo, for instance, because of his strong will, or maybe, but by accident, he killed a young boy at the burial ceremony of Ugbefi Ezodu's house when he fired a cannon. And for doing that, Okonkwo is made to go on exile. Okonkwo goes on exile in his mother's village. This is another indication that there is an intermarriage relationship between Umuofia people and the rest of the community around them. So these communities have marital relationship that goes on among them. I simply emphasize this aspect to show that there is intersocietal relationship in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart that doesn't include dominance and dependence. However, during Okonkwo's second year in exile, there is a herald of a new system of interaction that would change the entire pattern of the intersocietal networks among the natives. It is Obiorika's announcement of the destruction of Abami community by the white man. The white man constitute a new society that is coming in contact with Umuofia. And this marked the beginning of dominance and dominated and dependence relationship among communities in Things Fall Apart. Prior to this time of meeting between Umuofia people and the white, the population interact with other societies and no one was depending on the other. The destruction of Abame is the first recorded history of superior power dominance in African literary narrative. This form of domination soon reached a community called Bantan and finally overrun other communities, including Umuofia. It is an imperial intersocietal network that finds the rest of the world outside Europe, then as colonial outpost. Through the agency of the church, the imperial powers exerts its power over Umuofia, and it is evident in the unmasking of Egugu by a zealous convert, Enoch. I would like to explain something here in connection with the first session that Professor Akwanya participated in. He mentioned something, and the two professors were trying to explain the fact that the whites were not interested in teaching English language to the natives. It was rather the missionaries who had interest in teaching this language to the natives. And this actually was happening here. The missionary have been shown to be the agency of colonization in African literature. So we find it that oftentimes most of African literature that have the portrayal of colonialism will show where the missionaries are pushed ahead by the European government, not because of a formal agreement. However, there is a level of understanding among themselves as white, where the colonial authorities give protection to the missionaries, and the missionaries introduce Christianity to the heart of the population, and they become much docile for the colonial administration to operate. And now the colonial administration is working in agreement or in harmony with missionaries to conquer the blacks, as we can see in And Things Fall Apart. But the most unfortunate thing is that one of the zealots, most times, some of the people, the new converts, begin to show more commitment to the Christianity or Christian religion that they have been converted to. So to show much of their allegiance, we find Enoch, who burns down uncovers Egugu. Egugu is a masquerade, and it has a lot of meaning to the people of Umofia. And uncovering of Egugu is synonymous to killing ancestral spirit. So Egugu, Egugu is not just a masquerade, but it is a spirit. Egugu comes back and burns down the house of Enoch and the church. This creates a very serious tension where the resident officer, the district officer, becomes offended for the burning down of the church and the house of Enoch. So he assembles all the elders in Umofia, and when they all gathered together, he arrested them and threw them into prison. But mind you, when Egugu was uncovered, nobody sees that as an offense. This is to show the manifestation of center-margins relationship that go on in most African literature. Again, a recent novel published by IQAC by the title The Conquest of Azinga in 2021, the imperial authority tramples on its cultures and values he lacks knowledge of, the same way Egugu was unmasked, and nobody questioned that act of unmasking Egugu. Here, this gives him a false air of superiority, even when he tramples on the rights of people going into areas he doesn't have an understanding. It still gives him an air of superiority. In the text, the imperial power accuses one of the most resilient tribe, Azinga, of witchcraft. That's Azinga people are involved in witchcraft activities. But this is a guide to destroy the defense system of Azinga people and finally conquer them, because in the text we realize that Azinga stand as a hindrance for the imperial powers or the colonial authorities to penetrate the Somalia nation or the African colonial outpost as of then. So, and the colonial authorities came up with an idea of arresting those who are accused of witchcraft, but they initiate a scheme. They launch a scheme called Naka, which is anti-witchcraft crusade. Naka is a local language meaning submit things. That is the literal meaning of Naka, submit things. And it was a scheme. The police, the authorities were grouped in teams, going from one house to another, arresting people that have been suspected to be involved in witchcraft. And if you are arrested, you must submit every witchcraft emblem within your possession. Sometimes they maltreat people, they manhandle them, they beat them, and because of pressure, they confess what they do not even know. So this is what is happening in this new book, and the conquest of Azinga. So in the process of this Naka system or scheme of collecting the witchcraft emblem from the natives, we see an old man called Achibagi. Achibagi is accused of killing and eating his son, and his only son for that matter. That is the accusation leveled against him. Mind you, some of these colonial authorities are working along with some outcasts of the community. Outcasts in this case mean people who were troublesome, people who were a set of outlawed people based on their moral conduct. So when the white man came, he picked up such people and they became handy people for him to work with. So Achibagi has been accused of that, and then the resident officer becomes the magistrate, even though I don't know, he's a retired military officer, and at the same time, the magistrate. So he conducts a court where Achibagi is tried. Finally, because of pressure and everything, Achibagi confesses that yes, he has killed his only son and ate. He killed him. As a matter of fact, he cooked the body with egusi soup. Egusi is a local name for pistachio in Nigeria. So he mixed the body of the son with pistachio and ate. So the court was about to pronounce judgment that, of course, we couldn't expect less. But the turn of event is setting where the cook of a white missionary, who is a relation to Achibagi, steps forward to stand as a witness for Achibagi. And he explains to the white man that, no, you don't take this man literally for what they have said when it comes to the issue of killing and eating relations. So he takes time, the witness takes time to explain to the magistrate, the resident, the meaning of killing and eating a relation. And he uses what we call the sacrament of Holy Communion, where Christian faith says we participate in the eating and drinking of the blood of Christ. So when the cook explains this to the magistrate, the white man, he confesses that, permit me to read a direct quote from the magistrate, a white man. He says, in response to the witness, he says, if what you tell me is the truth, then we the British have killed many innocent people and have irreversibly trampled over a unique culture, which is in every way like our own. Let the accused be taken back into the maximum prison. The police officers and the witnesses should go to the home of the accused and exhume the body of the son. And if the body had not been tampered with, then the accused should be discharged and acquitted. Har 170. Finally, the court moves to the graveyard. The corpse is exhumed and examined, no part mutilated. Then Captain Edwards, as the magistrate, realizes that the British were judging where they had no authority to pass judgment. He finally confesses that we, himself and the entire empire included, are maniacal, diabolical, and monstrous dispensers of nightmare to the world. Har 195. Ayila Orkusa has observed that this present act of imposing one's ignorance on others with a sense of superiority as shown by the Europeans became the most mangled form of rape on other cultures in the 18th to the early 20th centuries. The witchcraft trial is one of the resonances of the imperial activities. It is common. It is a common narrative at every intersection of colonialism. Earlier, Miller fictionalizes with witch trial in The Crucible to depict a true life story of Massachusetts in 1692. The European imposition through colonialism did not stop even long after independence. What I have simply tried to show here is how colonialism and through imperialism has introduced what we call a core peripheral hierarchy, a relationship or intersocietal relationship or interaction that depends on dominance and dependence. But unfortunately, the dominance and dependence relationship or network system that imperialism introduced did not stop long after the end of colonialism in Africa. The system became much more complex, as we see again in the conquest of Azinga, where Lord Payne, the Governor General who is to hand over to the natives, decided deliberately to hand over power to people who were less intellectually strong enough to take up the affairs of the nation. In the text, that's the conquest of Azinga, we find out that on the eve of the handover, the Governor General calls on the Caliph, who is one of the traditional rulers. He calls upon him and made him to sign a document that he, the Caliph, did not read. The Caliph did not read, possibly because of his lack of capacity, intellectual capacity to read through the documents, know what the content is. He didn't read. Or he didn't read because the Governor General promised him that if he will sign the document, he and the British government will make sure power remains perpetually with the Kilan tribe. Kilan is a tribe in the text, among many other tribes as it is common in African culture. Kilan has been single-handedly picked by the white colonial authorities for the reason of subsistence. They have been docile, they have been more of conniving with the whites to manipulate their fellow blacks. So this type of unhealthy relationship goes on with the Kilan people. And finally, when the whites decided to leave, they met the Caliph to sign a document that warrants the British authority to still hold sway even in the distance to control the Somalia nation. The Caliph signs these papers with joy, and he happily says something. Oh, I quote, "Oh, my brother, the Governor General, you should have explained to me plainly that in the agreement, power will always go to the Kilan. This agreement, I can sign blindfolded. Give us power any day and you can take the rest. I will sign right away." He signed all the 20 copies of the bound agreement. High page 273. This is, as I mentioned in the introductory part of this talk, writers usually negotiate with their history, with their social facts to create literary works. This is exactly what Harry has done here. In Africa, particularly, the colonial authorities create a deliberate division among the blacks. You find them in a particular colonial outpost that will later become a nation. They will prefer a particular tribe and give it every support it needs, create a local tension among the tribes, and release the state into the hands of the black. The media says the nation has got independence, but the Europeans are still controlling such nations with the aid of a particular tribe they have chosen and assigned a new center. A new center in this case is not actually a new center, but it could fall between what we may term the semi-peripheral. Semi-peripheral is not peripheral itself, It's not a periphery shell, and it is not at the same time the core. It is not the center. It is neither. It is neither the margin. So this is what the whites do, or the colonial authorities do in most of the African nations. You find it in Nigeria. You find it in Kenya. You find it. You find everywhere in Africa. They deliberately chose tribes and put them against one another and live, handing over power to others with external support, remote controlling the nations, even while they are over there in Europe. So apart from the cultural inequalities, there are also economic inequalities, economics and political inequalities that are projected in African literature. There are evidences of economics and political inequalities in some African novels that depict the domination of the continent by the Europeans. Sembene Ousmane's God's Beast of Wood, first published in 1960, is set in one of the then French colonial outposts in West Africa, Senegal. The text harps on economics, domination, and dependence. There is an industrial tension between the rail workers and the rail owners. The rail workers are the blacks, the rail owners are the whites. And the rail the rail strike, or the industrial action by the rail workers, deals or sustain the plot of the text, God's Bits of Wood. The rail owners run the rail business for profit, but the workers feel cheated. Through a labor union leader called Bakayoko, the workers embark on strike action to make their grievances known. This is not the first strike in the history of the rail workers in the then colonial outposts in Senegal. The text has shown that the text has shown that there was a previous strike that achieved nothing except the loss of lives by the blacks. Under Bakayoko, the workers are protesting again unfair salaries. They are protesting lack of pensions. They are protesting lack of family allowances, and they are also protesting against racial discrimination at work. In response, the white authority cut the water and food supply. Some men are arrested while some killed. No industrial court is set to look into the matters until the women have desperately joined force with the men and trekked from Thiers to Dakar. This is a pathetic story that Sembene Ousmane has crafted here, where the people, the indigenous people, have given in everything they could. The manpower, the physical, the time, and everything, but they are meagerly paid. Their payment couldn't take care of their daily needs. And the people are saying, no, give us a better life, give us a better pay. They are not looking for something more than that. But because they have nothing, because they are less advantaged, because they don't have what it takes to withstand the white who are the dominant in terms of power, in terms of intellectual capacity, in terms of wealth and all that, decide to clamp down on these blacks. And it is actually a pitiful situation of dominance and dependence, inequality, and this is actually economic inequality. God's Beast of Wood is a political novel that chronicles the account of revolutionary struggle by the black Africans against the imperial white. According to Masood Ashraf Raja, Sembene Ousmane's God's Beast of Wood is critical for teaching and learning, activism, and resistance. In Raja's words, God's Beast of Wood serves a two-pronged purpose of representing a narrativized, particularistic account of a strike, while also offering certain universal aspect of class struggle. This dual focus on the local and the global makes the novel a perfect didactic instrument for teaching resistance in the current state of neoliberal capital. Usmanus, through his work, end of quote, that's Raja page 423. Usmanus, through his work, has preserved the memory of dominance and dependence relationship that can help teach Africans and the world entirely their long past. As Achebe had proposed for the role of a writer, Usmani has played his role as a writer, as a teacher. I simply want to show that what Usmani has done here, he has left a legacy. He has taught his people the history, their past, or what has happened. And in many years to come, this history remains. And as Achebe has suggested, he has played his role as a writer to teach his people their past. As I earlier suggested here, Usmani as a writer draws his inspiration for God's Piece of Wood from the historical fact of the 1948 Dakar's race strike, Rajab 423. So the novel has the trappings of history that serves for the preservation of memory. The chronicles of individual efforts in the text serves the purpose of personalization of collective memory, and that becomes an authentic history of the people. The text throws up the concept of solidarity as a tool for winning over the white dominance. Yet, solidarity alone has not been shown as a way out to break the core peripheral hierarchies in intersocietal relationship in African literature. Yes, solidarity has worked in the text when the women finally joined forces together with the men. They marched from Thiès to Dakar, and the women became the leaders of the strike, even though they got support from the men. It became easier for them to win over the fight. But this does not show, or this does not prove that solidarity will always give victory for the people, because in the process of solidarity, there will always be betrayal, as it is much shown in some of the works of Mwinyi Wationgo in Mau Mau fight. Similarly, the white economic dominance over the blacks has been outlined in the conquest of Azinga. The native Africans in the text are shown to have an organized way of leading their lives across all spheres. Yet the colonial authorities have altered this flow. The forests. All right, let me explain this again. In the conquest of Azinga, there is an organized system that the local people, the Azinga tribe particularly, has that help them to organize themselves in terms of leadership, agriculture, economics, and all that. But when the white man came, he interfered with this, and he succeeded in breaking down the system completely. A typical example of this case is a forest reserve that is owned and controlled by the natives. A particular man by name Achibaye, a character in the text. According to the traditional system, the forest is to be slashed and set on fire at the interval of every 5th year. The purpose is to hunt for the game that must have grown for food and other economic reasons, and to prevent the wildfire that could break out accidentally, risking the homes of the inhabitants who live in thatched huts. The setting of the forest on fire requires an elaborate ceremony, and all the neighboring tribes are invited for hunt. This also helps to strengthen the ties among the tribes. However, the story would change at the arrival of the colonial authorities. The district officer forbids the native from holding the ceremony and burning the forest. Not just that, he takes over the ownership and the control of the forest. on the eve of the hunt through the representative of the colonial authority, we see how the colonialist engages the owner of the forest. I will give us a direct quotation for that, but permit me again to just run over this which I have said concerning the economic activities in the conquest of Azinga. This forest is owned and controlled by the blacks, as I've said, but it has some economic values, it has some social values, it has, and in fact, it involves a lot of things. Ordinarily, after 5 years, the people are conscious that the wildlife in the forest after 5 years must have grown to a point where they could be used for food and for economic reasons. So it is organized in such a way that after 5 years, at the end of every 5 years, the tribes around gather together for a hunt. And this hunt brings this tribe together and strengthen the ties. But when the white man came, he decided that no, he has taken over the forest. The forest is no longer to be controlled by the blacks, and it is the government, the white government, that controls the forest. So in an argument between the representative of the colonial authority and the black owner of the original owner of the forest, I came to inform you that there will be no hunt tomorrow. Besides, from this moment, the government has banned bush burning. Slash and burn are primitive and savage. No, you can't tell us that. No, you have no such authority achieved by the protested. Of course, I have such authority, and as for the animals which you want to kill tomorrow, they are all government animals. Now, they belong to the white king in England, and only the whites, only with the written permission from the district officer can they be killed. Since when is this effective? Achi said, looking directly at Abulum. Since now, here is the prohibition order, said Abulum, hoping to impress the older man. Achi took the letter and, after eyeing it suspiciously, thundered, "If the white man has no sense, does that make you to lose yours? How can you call our system of controlling forests by slash and burning of unneeded grass around our homestead primitive? It is not the white man's way. It is primitive and savage," Abulum Baye added. This is a dialogue that took place between the white man's representative and the black. And it is also interesting here, Chimamanda Adichie's and Half of a Yellow Sun re-echo this type of claims of historical changes and all that. Now the white man is claiming the ownership of the forest, that the forest belongs to the government and to the king in England. In Chimamanda Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun, Odenibo tells his houseboy, who is to be sent to school, that if you go to school, whichever question they ask you, there are always two answers to each question. The real answer to the question and the answer the questioner will like to hear. And he gave him an example that if you go to school and the teacher asks you, who discovered River Niger? Tell him that it was Mungo Park that discovered River Niger. But that is the answer the teacher wants to hear. The real answer to that is that it is not Mungo Park that discovered River Niger, because the natives were even fishing in River Niger before Mungo Park was born. I simply use this to illustrate, to support the fact that the whites have a tendency of taking over a firm, taking over properties, taking over everything that is within the colonial outpost, and then making a name for himself. This is another clear indication of core peripheral hierarchies that exist in African novel. Similarly, Loretta Nkobo's Cross of Goats, published in 1981, is a narrative of resistance and struggle during the apartheid regime in South Africa. The story of Mandla illustrates, that's the protagonist, Mandla. That is not Mandela now, it's Mandla. It illustrates the horror of apartheid rule. His mother's resistance of apartheid regime, her survivor, and eventual death accentuates the economic and social plight of the black, which is created by the white. Apartheid means apartness in Afrikaans. Afrikaans is not Africa with A-F-R-I-C-A. It is Afrikaans with A-F-R-I-K-A-A-N-S. Actually, they are the white migrants that settled early in southern Africa. Earlier, I think in early 19th century. It was a system of legislation that upheld segregationist policies against non-white citizens of South Africa. This system privileged whites over blacks. Most of the activities of apartheid regime have become a rallying point for creative literature from the Southern African region. From 1948, the all-white government began some policies that were detrimental to the native blacks and kept black at the margins in their native land as squatters. This concept of squatters is quite pathetic. It runs in Southern African literature and East African literature because of the form and the type of colonialism that took place in those regions. Very fertile lands, the whites come in, takes over the land, and then the owners of the land become squatters on their ancestral land. So if you look at Munyi Watiangos and the grain of wheat, the Mau Mau fight in the grain of wheat is as a result of this taking over of the ancestral land from the inhabitants, the real owner, and making them squatters on their own ancestral land. Apart from these economic inequalities, there is also gender inequalities. It seems the web of imperialism attempted to overshadow gender inequalities that have been intrinsically woven in the fabrics of African culture. Thanks to some of the writers who would not leave this form of inequality escape unnoticed. The core peripheral relationship does not limit to imperial contact, but also in gender relations. African literature has shown some inequalities between gender across Africa. Lawal El-Sadawi demonstrates this in Woman at Point Zero, where Firdaus, the protagonist, suffers injustice from her father's house and is finally forced in quote, to marry a man as old as her father. It is not just Firdaus alone, but even her mother is not happy. But she has learned by tradition to take everything from her husband, so she keeps quiet. Firdaus says in one of her conversation with Sadawi that, my father, I quote, my father, a poor peasant farmer, who could neither read nor write, knew very few things in life. One, how to grow crops, how to sell a buffalo poisoned by his enemy before he died, how to exchange his virgin daughter for a dowry, how to beat his wife and make her bite the dust each night. This is a very troublesome or worrisome scene created in El-Sadawi's Woman at Point Zero. The brutality of man toward woman. We see that among the achievements, the man is not versatile in much things. He doesn't know much things. He just knows few things. But among his prominent achievement is to sell out his daughters in exchange for dowry and to beat his wife every day. This is a form of inequality, and it has been duly recorded or captured in African literature by Nawal Esadawi. Brutality towards female folks is counted for achievement for this father. But worst is the genital mutilation that has been given acceptance as a way of controlling women's sexual urge in male-dominated culture. Yes. And Fidel again says, when at a point she became perplexed, she became worried, and one day she became bold enough and asked her mother that, why did you give birth to me without a father? And the mother beat her for asking that question. But the following day, a woman who was carrying a small knife or maybe a razor blade, and they cut off a piece of thighs. She cried all the night. That's genital mutilation, and it is prevalent in African literature. When Professor Akwanya was speaking, he made mention of part of the things these new female writers are trying to show that is in existence in Africa, and African literature must not leave it behind. Buchie Mechita in The Joy of Motherhood captures the general conception that women are the extended self of men. She presents the cultural viewpoint that a woman is not complete when she is not married and or produced preferably a male child. So Nuego, the protagonist, battles with childbearing, which compels her to leave her first husband to a second husband. In the end, she has children. But looking at her life, marriage and childbearing has inflicted much pains on her. But the tradition makes her believe that her own worth is only in having children or of her own. So the joy of motherhood for Nuego consists in the pains derived from marrying wrong people and bearing children. This Buchie Mechita is simply making a society, the African society, does to a woman. And this, as far as literature is concerned, is a form of that exists in the society. So I term it under gender inequality. Similarly, we find it in God's Bit of Wood by Sembene Usmani, and the conduct of Ashitan, the wife of Bakayoko. The narrator says something interesting about this woman. He says that, but Ashitan had been brought up according to all the ancient rules and customs. She lied on the margins of the husband's existence, a life of work, of silence, and of patience. It would have been hard to know whether Bakayoko ever felt remorse for his infidelities to her, for this man's thoughts were sacred from the world. Osmani, page 238. Ashitan is in these few lines is described as an appendix and an extended self of her husband Bakayoko. So she cannot have feelings and thoughts of her own except what her husband decides. According to the tradition, this type of relationship constitutes inequalities between genders. In conclusion, it is evident from the foregoing that African literature gives attention to intersocietal networks. Few of these networks have shown to be without dominance and dependence, that is, co-peripheral differentiation. However, a larger part of African literature dwell on co-peripheral hierarchies, where certain groups that have advantages, that is the center, dominate those with lesser advantages, those are the margins. In African literature, centers and margins evoke power distribution, with its source not just limited to imperialism, but also from indigenous traditions and religion. Nevertheless, imperialism is shown to be the major source of centers and margins in African literature, since its big picture is domination. So even in the 21st century, colonialism remains the strongest source of core peripheral hierarchies through its offshoots, neo-colonialism that is supported by neoliberalism. Finally, as I have discussed here above, one of the recurring events in some of the texts outlined in this study that sustains these inequalities is the judicial system. Ironically, there is a breach of human rights in this text that draws its legitimacy in quote, from the judicial system in such text. It is clear that most advantaged groups in the text set up laws and law courts, passing judgments that are detrimental to the rights of the less advantaged groups or individuals. Such laws and its practitioners are better seen as tortfeasors, given the elaborate and the detailed scrutiny of international human rights and jurisprudence today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Orkusa. It was a pretty intellectually stimulating session. I hope I'm audible to you, sir.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. It was a huge sweep of texts, ideas, and a lecture that actually saw a coming together of the cultural context, the politics, the economy, as well as literature, and how literature negotiates with all these facets of the African life that had gone through such upheavals historically, economically, and sociologically. The core periphery issue you have taken up, and that actually has been the lead motive of your lecture, and you have discussed at length things fall apart and how the power dynamics actually shifted post-independence in Africa. There had been references to Semben Osmani, especially God's Bit of Woods. And of course, the lecture eventually journeyed towards the rights of natives and how what actually I was extremely intrigued by this, because you had actually been taking up this issue of the slash and burn agriculture being primitive. I actually belong to a country where just the other month, I guess, there was this Forest Amendment Act that was being imposed on us, and the native population in my country, they are creating an uproar because they fear that this would actually hand over the mineral-rich forest tracts to the big corporates. Of course, in the name of modernization, in the name of industrialization. So colonization actually has brought us closer. And this is exactly why we have these seminars, sir, because this actually shows that the core periphery, while we discuss this, it actually makes us so vulnerable when we think about it. But when we exchange ideas, Nigeria comes closer to India, and we at the periphery, the so-called periphery, we can unite and we can learn the language of resistance. Thank you so much, sir, for this intellectually stimulating session. I do not know whether my team hasn't really given me any questions so far from the audience, but I personally have one question, sir, for you, especially when it comes to God's Bit of Woods. This, of course, is one of the seminal texts when it comes to, African literature. Whenever we discuss African literature, whatever little that I remember of this text, there had been as many as 50 characters, if I'm not wrong, and there is no central character per se, as far as this novel is concerned, and it actually, takes into account two nations, Senegal and Mali, and this blockade, this strike, and all. Whenever we teach novel in our classrooms, we unknowingly, or in a way, we are goaded to celebrate this, this glorified individual of the Euro-American tradition. And whenever we shift to new literature, new literature in general and African literature in particular, there would always be this focus on this community, sir, and how this community actually emerges as the protagonist. This had been the case from Things Fall Apart to God's Bit of Woods. I'd like you to kind of elaborate on this, sir, because when we try and teach them, we find it a little difficult to kind of make our students believe, who have been overfed, I must say, on this dose of Euro-American tradition of eulogized individual in the novel writing tradition. How do we actually go about that? This is a question from a teacher to another, sir.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Maybe in the course of our interaction, I will also learn from you, and because your comments alone have also drawn my attention to some things that I have to also give much attention to. And the issue of the society being a protagonist is an interesting way of writing. I first noticed it from Things Fall Apart, as you have rightly mentioned, and where Umofra is the protagonist. There is African sense of communality that project communality beyond the individual. It is not the fight of a man taking charge or being in charge. If you notice the fight between the rail workers and the rail owners, the authorities, in the process of this strike, it wasn't even the man Bakoyoko himself that gave the last blow that broke the camel's back. It was a woman that people least love to associate with. These are realities that it is not about an individual, it is about a society. The writer is projecting an idea of society, and the ideology of solidarity comes in and gives it the face that we are not looking at individual as a protagonist, but we are looking at the achievement of the society or the community as a whole.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. When it comes to this individual community thing, sir, this is just an observation. I generally ask the student, my senior students about this. Like, I generally throw a question to them like, who do you think is the most prominent 20th century French thinker, right? And those young people, they would come up with names such as Sartre and Derrida, Camus, some would say Lacan. But in spite of being trained in new literature, very few, actually one or two, would come up with the name of Frantz Fanon. Okay. This just goes on to show that how this entire interpellation of this classic realist Euro-American tradition has actually, kind of clogged us, has actually stopped us from, spreading ourselves beyond the given. And this is exactly where, sir, a seminar like this, an intellectually stimulating session like this, becomes important. I just can't thank you enough. I'm sure that this session would be recorded and would be gotten back to for innumerable times, for sure. I of course had several other issues I would have liked to take up with you, but I guess there is a paucity of time, and there was this initial technical issue to start off with. But sir, if I can get your email ID, I'd like to have a conversation with you sometime soon.
There's no problem. There's no problem.
Right.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was extremely. We were extremely honored as an audience to have you. Thank you. Over to Nilanjan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharnoda, Professor Sharnoda, for hosting this session. Thank you very much, Professor Ayila Orkusa, for joining all the way from Nigeria. It's a privilege to have you, and I think it was one of the most academically rich sessions that we have had. And I think this was a very student-friendly talk, very friendly to the research scholars as well. I'm sure they're going to get back to this talk through the YouTube, and they might sort of even contact with you for further references. Thank you very much, sir, and we would like to have you more in our further endeavors. So that is it for the session. Now, for the paper presenters, please. This is a very important announcement for the paper presenters. Kindly join the sessions in which you are supposed to present. Okay, so therefore, if you are scheduled in parallel session, say 6, you have to click on the session 6, the Gmeet link meant for the session 6, and you can enter over there. Our chairpersons are on the way of entering. Okay, they will enter very soon. So kindly start entering. And Sharananda, you are hosting the meeting. Debanjan, you are also hosting the meeting. And the other chairs, Professor Chamil Jana, Professor Mondol, Professor Dash, please enter your respective rooms, as it were, and we can begin in 5 minutes. So whenever you enter, you begin. Okay, so that is what it is. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And that is it for this plenary session. Thank you very much.